As other nations rise, will the United States have the strategic patience and wisdom to deal successfully with the new environment? We'll look at that next on Global Perspectives.
This program is made possible in part by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India program at UCF.
Hello and welcome to the Global Perspectives Show. I'm John Maisto, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. This is the turbulent world in which we live, a world full of challenges, a world full of opportunities. How do we understand what's going on when we hear about, for example, transitions to democracy? We have someone here today who can explain what's going on in various parts of the world in terms of democracy, in terms of challenges, in terms of opportunities. His name is Ambassador John Maisto, a veteran member of the U.S. Foreign Service, now in the private sector. He's the chair of the Board of Advisors for the American Committees on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Ambassador Maisto.
Thank you very much, John. A real pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit just briefly about the American Committees, what your role is with that organization, what that organization tries to do in terms of these many challenges and opportunities we face in the global environment.
The American Committees on Foreign Relations offer an opportunity to the 27 chapters or committees in the United States to that membership to get really immersed in today's foreign affairs issues in today's globalized world where the challenges to the United States are so different from what they have been. It's citizen participation, getting the opportunity to get into them and reaching out into the community with projects of education and involving students to just increase the depth and the breadth of their understanding.
And that's a very noble undertaking, and given the array of issues we face in the 21st century, as you've said, many of them are opportunities, many of them are challenges. Nothing is easy. But as you look at the array of issues facing the United States, what would you say are the most challenging, the most significant?
There are so many, John. There are so many. We are living in an era of transitions to democracy, but each one of them is different. There is no uniform process going on in the world, and there is no cookie-cutter approach of the United States of America to deal with them. In my diplomatic career, I've dealt with several of them at different times, and each presented different realities that we must understand. We need the best possible diplomatic corps to do that, the best possible embassies reporting back to Washington. We need the best possible policy people. We've just seen the Arab Spring, for example. And as anybody who's following this knows, it ain't easy trying to sort all of this out with regard to A, what's going on, and B, what's the best approach for the United States to deal with it.
And I guess one big difficulty is the uncertainty of it all, because we don't know where it's going to go as a whole or where it's going to go in any one country. We don't know what the end result of this is going to be. I've heard some people say, oh, the Arab Spring is over, it's done. To me, it's just beginning, even in places where it's advanced considerably. We haven't had elections. For the most part, we haven't had significant changes of the kinds that have been envisioned.
If we're looking at transitions to democracy, which I believe is what we're doing, we're seeing different scenarios and different timetables and different problems in each of the countries. Just take Tunisia and Egypt occurred roughly at the same time. They're moving not at the same speed, not with the same institutional development that we would like to see, but they are moving in accordance to the realities of their own society. Looking at what's happening in Syria, a different situation, a different historic moment for Syria, a different political situation, a different authoritarian regime, as opposed to the other authoritarian regimes that existed in the other two countries. Then you have Bahrain, you have Yemen, and of course you have Libya, which is yet something else. My own experience has been in other parts of the world, but I can perceive some basic elements that you have to look at very carefully as you move your way through the steps to understand, number one, understand what's going on, and number two, how you deal with it in terms of advancing the foreign policy interests of the United States.
Well, let's stick with Libya for just a few minutes. A very, very complicated situation. There were some who thought it was going to be over relatively fast. Unfortunately, it has not turned out that way. We hear about the possibility that Gaddafi will leave, that he's talking about that or giving signals about it seriously. We've heard other discussions about a potential two-state solution for Libya. We've had concerns about the supply of NATO forces operating in the area in terms of capabilities, and on and on. It just seems infinitely complicated, and there doesn't seem to be a clear sense of direction. How do you explain that to people and keep them engaged and optimistic about the potential outcome?
I think what we have to keep reminding people is, again, that these transitions are all different, number one. Number two, don't expect it to be easy. Expect it, on the contrary, to be difficult. Expect hurdles. Number three, you have to try to measure to see if it's going in the right direction. I would submit that with Libya, it is moving in the right direction, more slowly than we thought. There is another possibility that President Gaddafi may not leave Libya. He may have his own spot there in the desert, and the rest of the life of Libya would go on without him, as opposed to dictators going to live in Saudi Arabia or France, as we have seen in cases in the past. But my own view is that the United States handled Libya well, because the Europeans should be more interested than we are, looking at what exactly is the U.S. national interest. Number two, there had to be some sort of involvement of the international community. First was what the Arab League did, then what the United Nations did, and then the role of NATO. And we're still in it. I was off speaking at one spot in the United States, and somebody asked me, why don't we just go in there and take Gaddafi out? Well, the answer is, wait a minute. It's not our national interest to do that. It's up to the Libyans to do their own revolution, and it's up to our European friends and allies to get out and do what they have to do. The United States is involved, and to my mind, in the best possible way. And I would venture to say that I come from Washington, D.C., and overall, that's where the political forces in Washington come out vis-a-vis Libya.
We could talk all day about the Middle East and North Africa, but I'd like to move over to your favorite part of the world, the one where you spent most of your diplomatic time, Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's also a part of the world that is very important to us geographically here in the United States. Talk about some of the transitions that are going on or could be going on in that region and where you see them going.
First of all, we have to remember, John, that in Latin America, a tremendous change has taken place. It was triggered by the end of the Cold War. Democracies blossomed in the area. All the governments in place in Latin America are there by virtue of elections. There is one situation that is not that. That, of course, is Cuba. But all the other governments are there through regular elections. But democracy is pretty tough. I see three separate categories of democracies, some that are doing very well, with problems, to be sure, the types of which we have in democracies. Look at our own democracy and its issues, institution-wise. The issues of fighting corruption, the issues of security, the issues of dealing with poverty and job creation, etc. Then you have countries kind of in a middle level that are really, really struggling. Then you have countries that are nominally democratic, but are kind of on the verge of becoming, slipping into authoritarianism. That means that the United States, in our policies, we have to tailor each policy to deal with that situation. Then you have what I consider the biggest issue in Latin America for the United States today, which is Mexico, and getting Mexico right. And that is a huge challenge because Mexico is our neighbor.
Could you give us an example of a country in each of the three categories that you referenced, and then let's talk about Mexico. But first, the three examples.
Okay, in the first category, that's pretty easy. There are several, and they're good examples. Brazil is an example. Center-left government, elected, strengthening its institutions, not perfect. They have their occasional corruption issue and their infrastructure issues, but Brazil is not only a leader in the hemisphere, but in the world. Chile, which has done tremendously well in the years since the Pinochet dictatorship. They've reduced poverty from 40-odd% of the population to less than 14%, and they're still battling poverty. I would put Colombia in that category, a country that has really come back and pulled itself up by its bootstraps. 10 years ago, Colombia was considered to be almost a failed state, and it's not, because of smart policies on the parts of the Colombians. Good leadership starts with good leadership, and smart foreign policy on the part of the United States, and support by Colombia's international partners. In the second category, countries that are going through very difficult times in terms of their institutions are many of the Central American countries, with the exception, I would say, of Costa Rica. And they are struggling to deal with democratic institutions that aren't there yet, with problems of poverty. In Central America, you're the second and third and fourth poorest countries in the hemisphere after Haiti. And there is the drug scourge there that comes from Mexico, because the squeeze has come, the bad guys have penetrated the northern tier of Central America. Guatemala is particularly worrisome, as is Honduras, and a little bit more El Salvador. Then you have countries that have democratically elected governments who deal in authoritarian practices. Some would call these hybrids of democracy and authoritarianism. Venezuela, a country I love dearly, I served in, is one of them. You have a certain amount of that going on in Bolivia. So what does this mean? It means that there is no cookie cutter approach. We have to be very smart in terms of how we deal with it. We have to apply the tools of diplomacy, foreign assistance, the trade piece, because the countries with which we have trade agreements are countries that are doing pretty well. And then the problem, just paying attention to our neighborhood, not the backyard, the neighborhood. Look at the population of the United States, the changing population of the United States. The Caribbean is part of this too. Not enough attention is paid to the English-speaking Caribbean, to be sure. So we have a lot on our plate right now.
Right. Well, let's talk about the neighborhood, specifically in the context of the United States and Mexico. Mexico's in the neighborhood. It's right against the United States. It's the most proximate of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And there are extensive problems that seem to be beyond the ability of government to control in many parts of Mexico. How do we address those? Do you see places where we're making progress? You have reason to be optimistic about Mexico's near-term
First,
future.
John, I never use the word optimism with regard to any part of the Western Hemisphere. I'm hopeful.
Hopeful, okay.
Okay. And certain things in Mexico are going in the right direction. The Mexican economy, in spite of the financial crisis, is doing better than ours in terms of its recovery. The Mexicans are making progress in taking down the bad guys. Week after week, you see examples of narco criminals in Mexico being captured. A lot of this comes from cooperation with the United States, which we have begun to do in recent years in providing information and intelligence. There's a downside to that, and that is there's a squeeze on northern Central America. Guatemala, particularly the northern part of Guatemala, it has been really hit by the penetration of narcotypes who get into local governments, governors, mayors. Doesn't take a lot of money to buy politicians on the part of the drug lords. Doesn't take a lot of money, and the Mexicans understand this and they're fighting against it. So economically, Mexico is doing better. The flow of immigration north, illegal immigration, has gone down. But the United States has to really stay with its Mexican policy. That is, we're providing $1.5 billion over 3 years to help the Mexicans deal with their infrastructure, their social infrastructure, their justice infrastructure, courts, et cetera, et cetera. In my mind, that's not enough. And we are a huge part of the problem for 2 reasons. Number one, we are the biggest consumer of drugs in the world, and those drugs all flow through Mexico. And number 2, there are arms that flow out of the United States into Mexico. It's very difficult for us to control those arms. We're trying. I don't think we're trying hard enough. There are Second Amendment considerations that come into play, the numbers of gun dealers that are close to the U.S.-Mexican border, court cases that are dealing with this. The Mexicans think that we're not being serious about that flow, and they constantly question what we're doing about the drug consumption. We're treating it as a health issue. Are we doing enough? Those are huge questions, not only for our government, but for our society.
Mm-hmm. So as you look into the future, not decades, but next 5 to 10 years, are you hopeful that the situation overall will improve? And if you were in charge, what types of steps would you take to ensure that the situation would improve?
I am hopeful as long as we stick with it. But perhaps even more important than our sticking with it is governments, country by country in the region, who have leaders in place that are willing to take it on. Colombia is one country, 2 back-to-back presidents who have really taken on the Colombia issue. The Mexicans are taking it on too. President Fox and now President Calderon, they're going to have an election next year. The Mexicans are seized with it. They're tired of the violence. But there has never been a better time of U.S.-Mexican cooperation on the basic issues. There's a lot of noise out there. There always is a lot of noise, but Mexican and American officials understand each other. So we have to pay political attention, we have to provide diplomatic attention, we have to send really, really good representatives at all levels, and we have to provide the resources necessary. When you think about $1.5 billion for Mexico, and even though we've increased by 300 million or so the amount of money for the Central American countries, in my view, we have to be thinking about more and better targeted money on dealing with the infrastructure of democracy, judiciary, police, education, job creation, because it's the young people who are lured into the drug stuff because it pays. We have to be patient. There's something that we need to do, not only with regard to Mexico and Latin America, but the other parts of the world we talked about. It's called strategic patience. We have to be engaged strategically, and we have to understand that things aren't going to change from night to day. Libya comes to mind. Egypt comes to mind. Any other, pick your, Pakistan comes to mind with all the difficulties we have there. And certainly Afghanistan comes to mind as well. We got to be smart. We have to have the best people in place. We have to have the best foreign service out there. And that's why I like to call attention to the fact that even the U.S. military says, we need money for the Foreign Service. How is it that we have more people playing musical instruments in United States bands, military bands and orchestras, than we have well, maybe not more, but about the same number?
Yeah, it's a pretty
8,000 Foreign Service officers a year round. The crew of the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan is 7,000 sailors. We need to, and even our military is making the point. Ask General Petraeus, he'll tell you. Ask the former Secretary of Defense, he'll tell you in no uncertain terms. We need to get the resources to have the best possible foreign service.
Are we capable of strategic patience as a nation? Because the United States historically has been impatient. We want results immediately. We want returns quickly. And we want to go into a crisis and resolve it and bring the troops home as fast as possible. Are we capable of strategic patience?
One of the challenges of a world that is more globalized, that is multipolar, if you choose, is that we're going to have to get used to it. Sometimes we can do it. I was involved in Panama back in 1989. It was a quick in and out, relatively easy when you think of it. But then in our lifetimes, we've had the Korean War, we've had Vietnam. Now, how long have we been involved in Afghanistan? Libya is, what, several months old, but it looks like it won't be anything like any of the latter three. But our leadership, both our elected leadership, our Congress, our society, our media, have to understand this. And that requires strong leadership on our part, wise leadership in the Congress of the United States, and faith in ourselves. I'm almost reminded of the lessons of the women's soccer team in the United States in its quest for the World Cup. What an example they've shown. How? By the best training, by being smart and sticking with it. How's that for a formula for dealing with foreign affairs?
There you go. What about the relative position of the United States worldwide in terms of its power, influence, and so forth, in light of all the other rising and semi-rising powers? Do you think that will make a difference in our ability to be patient, because we will have to be?
Our power stems from a strong economy that everybody understands and recognizes as a strong economy, and our military position. No other country or group of countries in the world has the military might that the United States of America has. However, on the economic side, everybody's watching. The whole world is watching. And we had better get it right. We had better pay attention to the need for our economy to be strong, because if you ask any strategic thinker in the United States, political or military or whatever, they will tell you that power flows from economic strength. There has to be unquestionable U.S. economic strength in order for us to be able to deal with this more diversified, challenging world. We can do it. Dealing with China, hey, we're competitive. We're smart. We've stepped up to it before. Watching India, sure, that's fine. Europe, is it an old Europe? Is it going to be able to get through its financial crisis? It's in our interest that Europe gets through its financial crisis, and it's in the interest of the United States to be as strong as we possibly can be. And in my own view, I am absolutely hopeful. Yes, we can do it, and that leads to something that I'm willing to enter into the fray. I believe the United States is an exceptional power.
Okay, well that's a key perspective on this. Well, let's assume we get past the economic crisis and we're buoyant again. And you have an opportunity to pick one challenge that you can address, that you can fix. You have opportunity, you have resources, you have political support. What would that be and why?
You're giving success on the economic and financial side. Good. I think there are two major things to wind down our presence in a successful way in both Iraq and Afghanistan. One. With that goes being able to defend this country against any terrorist attack, being satisfied that we can do that, number one. And the second one, I would say, is in our own neighborhood, in dealing with Mexico and Central America. Because if we don't do that successfully, there will be a drain on U.S., not only U.S. government, but U.S. society, because it's the neighborhood.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today, Ambassador Maisto. And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Maisto. We'll see you next time.
This program is made possible in part by funding from the UCF Global Perspectives Office, the Global Connections Foundation, and the India program at UCF.